Memories of Fireflies. There was an air of anticipation around the palace. Aelithra had caught sight of the servants as they moved with purpose around the palace grounds, their arms full of colourful cloth. She watched them from her lessons room through the large window set to the south that faced out over the grand courtyard that sprawled in front of the palace. The courtyard was the meeting place between the palace and the rest of the city. She could just see the city beyond, falling away down the hill and winding between the rivers, nestled in the embrace of the silver birch trees that formed the grove of the river birch kingdom. Aelithra was fascinated to see the cloth strung between the trees that lined the courtyard, fluttering in the wind like they were dancing. And if she strained her ears, she could just hear the faint note of the court band practicing their songs in the open space. The hard snap of her teacher's ruler against her desk brought her attention back to where it was supposed to be. Bright green eyes wide when she saw how close the ruler had come to her hand. "Pay attention, princess," her teacher said sternly. He lifted the ruler and returned to his own desk to continue his lesson. Aelithra had long lost the thread of it. She flexed her hand where it had sat on the desk before pulling it back to her and sliding it into her lap, and forced herself to focus on the lesson again. But her curiosity soon won out and she raised a hand and waited to be noticed. It was not always guaranteed that her teacher would stop a lecture to answer any questions. To her surprise, his voice trailed off and he heaved a sigh. "Yes, princess?" he asked, unhappy with the interruption. "What is happening in the grand courtyard?" she asked. "The Equinox Festival," her teacher told her shortly. She tested the name soundlessly, her eyes drawn back outside to the festooned courtyard. "Could we not learn about that today?" she asked, turning her attention back to her teacher with effort. He shook his head. "Perhaps if you were more diligent in your proper studies, we might have time to study the festivals." He raised a pointed eyebrow at her. Aelithra felt her cheeks heat, eyes dropping to the open book on the desk in front of her. Her teacher took this as her acquiescence to focus on her work and returned to the lesson. Aelithra carefully did not look out the window again. Rordan watched the fireflies dance between the trees at the edge of the forest. It reminded him a little of the candle dance he'd watched his parents practicing for the spring festival tonight. It was the way the groups of them came together and parted and circled each other. It was mesmerising. "Don't be staring at them too long now," the gruff voice of his dad came, with a large warm hand on his shoulder. "Those are fairy lights." Rordan looked from the dancing fireflies and up into the broad, bearded face of his dad. "Those are fireflies," he said, because it was true. His dad laughed. "True, but on days like this, when the day and the night are the same, the fireflies all gather themselves up to cross over into the fae realm. We call them fairy lights then, because they can lure a man to places he shouldn't go." He drew Rordan around to face him, expression serious. "So don't you be following them. You hear?" Rordan nodded. He knew the stories about the fae. Old widow Emma told the best stories during winter, and the ones about the fae luring people into the forest and spiriting them away were always the best. But he couldn't help but ask, why do they cross into the fae realm? His dad shrugged, turning them away from the forest and the fireflies. "Who knows? Perhaps the fae use them instead of candles in their dances." He gave Rordan's shoulder another squeeze and smiled. "Now back to the house. Your ma's waiting with your new tunic, ready for the celebration tonight." Rordan grinned. Without a backward glance at the forest and the dancing fairy lights, he raced back towards the house where his ma stood silhouetted in the door, waiting with a smile. Aelithra knelt on the window seat in her room, her nose pressed to the glass, craning to see the courtyard. But her view from here was obscured by the line of apple trees, the pink and white blossoms shielding the courtyard from her. She could just about make out the colourful cloth streamers she had watched the servants fix to the branches from her lessons room earlier. And there was the faint glow of lanterns that made the shadows shift, so she could almost make out the people down there, moving, talking, dancing. What she could see unobscured were the fireflies. They danced above the courtyard, called by some indefinable magic to join the celebration. Their swirling beauties seemed to be moving in perfect time to the music she could faintly hear. Her wonder at it faded as she sat back, her father's recent scolding still ringing in her ears. It had been a rare midday meal with both her father and her older brothers. Usually she ate alone with her brothers. Rarely did her father join them. It had taken her most of the meal to gather enough courage to ask about the celebration. Kieran, her older brother, had looked about to answer her, but the way he flinched and turned a wounded look to their eldest brother Brennan told Aelithra that he had been kicked into silence. Then her father's voice had drawn her full attention to him. "You know nothing of our celebrations or customs, Aelithra," he had said, his voice cold and hard. "How could you when you do not bother to learn? You will not be attending tonight's celebration. You will only cause me embarrassment." He had been unhappy that she hadn't come as far in her lessons as he expected, but she had been so distracted by the anticipation and excitement that had swept through the palace these last few days, had wanted to learn about the celebration that was taking place. But she was slow in her book learning, behind almost always it seemed. By the time she caught up, the thing she wanted to learn was past, and there were other, more important things she needed to know. She pulled back further from the window, and from the celebration she could only glimpse. The sounds of the music and merriment below could still be heard faintly, but even those slipped away to silence as she left the window and crossed the room to her desk. Her eyes went to the door, and the handle that invited her to turn it, to open the door and slip through. She was sure she could sneak down the halls. Everyone else would be at the celebration anyway. She could go unnoticed, just to see what it was like. Her hand was on the handle, fingers clenched around the metal. "You will only cause me embarrassment." She heard her father's words again, remembered how he had looked when he had said it, disappointed in her. Her fingers unclenched and her hand fell away from the door. She turned her eyes from the door and to the desk instead, and the books on it. She seated herself and opened the first book and carefully flipped through the pages. Beyond were her current lessons, in search of any hints of celebrations, of customs. She scanned the small print, eyes narrowed in the soft light from the candle lantern beside her bed for mentions of the spring equinox. She couldn't read far, her eyes beginning to hurt as they strained in the light of the room, and at last she closed the book and sighed. She returned to the window and looked out again. She looked at the dancing fireflies and the brightly lit and colourful courtyard and the merry people hidden behind the trees. Her father was right, of course. She hadn't learnt enough. Perhaps if she caught up fast enough, she could prove to him that she wouldn't be an embarrassment and be allowed to join the next one. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the window. She closed her eyes and just listened to the music below and imagined what it might be like.